In 2024, I set my Goodreads goal to 100 books because I'm out of my mind, and I just wanted to see if I could do it, and I got to a grand total of 104 books. So here's everything I liked, everything I didn't, and all of my thoughts in between. And I'm going to be talking about the books that I DNF'd, did not finish, at the end, in case you're curious as to what made me want to put those books down. To ease myself into this ridiculous reading goal, I started off with a couple of short books, first one being Open Water by Caleb Azuma Nelson. When people ask me, what's a book that's written beautifully? What's a book where the words are gorgeous and poetic and lyrical? It's this one. I'm not much of a romance reader, but when I do read romance, it's usually something like this. This is about two black creatives who meet in a pub in South London, and their ensuing love story and them struggling to fit in and make a name for themselves and dealing with very heavy themes. This is only 145 pages, if I remember correctly. And I loved this book. Number 2, we have Exteriors by Annie Ernaux. This is the author herself journaling for 7 years. And if I remember correctly, it's because her mother develops a degenerative brain condition where the author realizes that she's been taking a lot of things for granted. So she starts journaling things that happen around her. It's a very interesting book about what happens in life and around you, and just capturing these little moments that you find interesting and just having a physical reminder of your life. Next, we've got my first 5-star read of the year, starting off so strong. Eleanor Oliphant is Completely Fine by Gail Honeyman. Now, I want to preface this by saying anyone who is leaving negative reviews about Eleanor Oliphant as a protagonist being unlikable, don't hang out with neurodivergent people enough, because she's clearly neurodivergent, and it says in the back of the book she struggles with appropriate social skills and tends to say exactly what she's thinking. Hello? Then she meets this guy named Raymond, and he is the IT guy at her job, and it is a story about how friendship can bring out the best in people and how important it is to foster these lovely relationships with other people, and also mommy issues up the wazoo, because the whole book she has these phone conversations with her mom, and it's telling the relationship that she has with her mom based on how these phone calls go. So this is a lovely, lovely book. Highly recommend it. And because I apparently didn't have enough mommy issues content, I decided to double down by reading Crying in Hmart by Michelle Zauner. This is the memoir of the lead singer of the band Japanese Breakfast. She was writing about what it was like grieving and processing the loss of her mother. And like everybody says that's read this book, the descriptions of food are so vivid, so mouthwatering, so incredible, and you really get a sense of how important food was when bonding with her mom. And it is a wonderful exploration of grief. It's a wonderful book about family and complicated mother-daughter relationships, and I think it's a great time. Be a little careful with it if you've got mommy issues. This might not be the one for you. Next up, we've got Born a Crime, Stories from a South African Childhood by Trevor Noah. So I went into this with the wrong mindset because I thought it was going to be his childhood all the way to how he got to where he is today, but it's just stories from a South African childhood. It's fantastic for that. I just went into it thinking it was going to be something else. Fascinating look at Trevor Noah's life before he came to the States, before he was a comedian, learning about his relationship with his mom and his stepdad and all of the tragedy and awful things that were happening to him during his childhood in apartheid South Africa. He is a fantastic writer. I enjoyed this book very, very much. And literally reading both of these in tandem was pretty crazy, just back to back. After those two, I thought to myself, let me read something small, something light, something quick, like a little palate cleanser. And then I read Small Things Like These by Claire Keegan. Didn't know going in how heavy the subject matter was in terms of this dark history of Ireland. This is soon going to be a film with Cillian Murphy. Well, I think it already is. Oh my God, it's been long enough where it's already the movie's already out. I gotta watch. Oh my God, hold on. This is a book about Bill Furlong, who is a coal miner, and he is someone who is witnessing a lot of injustices happening around him, and he is so conflicted because he wants to talk to somebody about them. He wants to bring it to people's attention, but it's about the pathology of silence in this small knit community that is pretty much controlled by the church. Highly recommend it, and I will be watching the movie. Next, we've got Project Hail Mary by, ooh, hold on. Wow. We got Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir. This is the same author that wrote The Martian, which also got adapted into a movie with Matt Damon. And this is also going to be adapted into a movie soon with Ryan Gosling, whom I think is perfect casting for this. This is a hard science fiction book in the sense that it is scientifically accurate, not that it's hard to read. This book is basically what Interstellar was trying to do when balancing like emotion and really, really, really big brain science. Oh, did I hurt somebody's feelings? I don't care. Interstellar's mid, and I'll die on that hill. This is about astronaut Ryland Grace. He wakes up from cryosleep in space and realizes he's the only person alive on the space mission, that he has no recollection of how he got there, which is so scary. And as the book progresses, you see flashbacks that explain how he got there, what he's supposed to be doing, and everything in between. I don't want to say too much more than that because this book is such a delight and I want everybody to read it. Is it a big boy? A little bit. You know, it's no fantasy novel, but like that's a solid read. Next, I read Foster by Claire Keegan, which I liked more than Small Things Like These. She is the queen of writing short but impactful books. It's about this little girl who is sent to live with some relatives because her family and her parents can't afford to take care of her. And this little girl is basically discovering what it's like to be well taken care of and loved for the first time. And when I tell you, I was sobbing by the end of it. The end of Foster by Claire Keegan is so beautiful, and I highly recommend it. Another short but extraordinarily impactful book, Kim Ji-young, born 1982, by Cho Nam-ju, translated by Jamie Chang. This is the book that started the 4B movement in South Korea. Now, this is a fictional book about a Korean every woman who is chronicling her life experiencing treatment at the hands of men. And even though it's fictional, what makes it so interesting and grounded is that it has footnotes that contain actual data about what life is like for women in South Korea. Definitely something to look into. This is one of those books that makes you really mad when you're reading it because you're like, I cannot believe that this is happening. Next we have At Night All Blood is Black by David Diop, translated by Anna Muscovakis. Can you tell I'm a Jack Edwards fan? A lot of his book recs I read this year. This is a book about a soldier who is asked by his best friend to be mercy killed during the war, but he can't do it because it's his friend, and he watches his friend die an agonizing death. And the whole book is him coming to terms with and processing how his decision affected his friend. It is short but impactful. Once again, I'm a big fan of books that just know how to tell a story. They are concise, they are well written. This is a book that is a very challenging read, but ultimately a pretty rewarding read. The end can be shocking to some people. It took me a couple of reads to really realize what happened to him. It's a fascinating book, and tread with caution. I do recommend it, but it's a heavy book to read. If you were a Tumblr girly during the height of Tumblr in like 2011, 2012, I'm talking Marina and the Diamonds, Lana Del Rey, that type of aesthetic was your feed, highly recommend Bunny by Mona Awad. This is a book that is going to be better the second time you read it, because the first time I read it, I loved it, I enjoyed it. However, I was a little bit let down by the end, but I feel like on the second reread, I'll be like, oh! This is about a woman who's at a university, and there's these group of strange girls that all call each other Bunny, and it's very weird. Essentially, Mean Girls, Heathers, and Your Tumblr Feed Had a Baby. These girls invite the protagonist to kind of join their group, and the protagonist realizes that this group likes to do this very strange activity. And again, this is a book that is better if you just go into it not really knowing a lot. It is a little bit of horror, it's a little bit of psychological je ne sais quoi. It's a lot. It's a fun time, and I liked it. Another category of book you're gonna notice that I read a lot of is I Support Women's Rights and Women's Wrongs. And a massive contender in that category is Big Swiss by Jean Bagan. This is unhinged. This is about the protagonist who works as a transcriber for a sex therapist, and the protagonist ends up falling in love with one of the sex therapist clients after transcribing her sessions and finding out about her life. Just it's a HIPAA violation, I'll tell you that much. This is one of those books where you're like, how could this possibly end? You have dug yourself in a hole so deep. How could you possibly get out of it? We're now at the first book that, if I ever see the author, it's on site. For legal reasons, that's a joke. I will not be doing that. This is None of This Is True by Lisa Jewell, one of my first thrillers, I feel, and I was so excited to read this. I was like, oh my god, this is universally loved. This is so popular. Oh, I can't wait to like buckle in and read this. This was not for me, because the big plot twist of the book is the title of the book, and I did not understand how I was supposed to be shocked by the reveal that none of it was true when I'm 3/4 in and the reveal. Oh my god. Also, the so-called villain in the story is one-dimensional and didn't really have a clear motivation for doing what she did. It felt over the top and campy and cheesy is what I'm trying to say, not like a real thriller that I was expecting. You ever read a book so brutal that you have to mention it in therapy? Because I have, and that's The Year of Magical Thinking by Joan Didion. This is a nonfiction book. This is Joan Didion's sort of autobiography about the time that she lost her husband and her daughter gets extraordinarily sick. And this is a book about grief, about sadness, about the twists and turns that life can take. And the reason I had to mention this in therapy is because I started going to therapy for grief. So when I was like, oh my god, let me read My Year of Magical Thinking, the dynamics of Joan Didion's family were almost identical to my family. So it was a time. This is an extraordinary book. I think everybody should read this. Make sure you save it for when you have the spoons for it, because this isn't one of those like, I'm just gonna read it. No, it's gonna rip your heart out of your chest. This I found in the sales section of my local library, and I'm like, oh my god, this is Matthew McConaughey's favorite book, or at least one of his top 3 favorite books ever. It's The Greatest Salesman in the World by Og Mandino. This is a book that Matthew McConaughey mentions in his memoir, Green Lights, which I did read a while back. It's a phenomenal memoir. I recommend listening to it because his southern drawl makes everything real nice. I would like to apologize for my attempt at a southern drawl. Clearly, I liked it too, annotated the hell out of it. It's as advertised. It's about the greatest salesman in the world, his wisdom that can be applied to real life. I believe this is one of those self-development books that a lot of people read, and I think it was quite lovely. There's also a line in here that I'm pretty sure was inspiration for a line Matthew McConaughey says in the movie The Gentleman with Guy Ritchie, 2019, and I posed the question online to see if he would ever answer, and I haven't heard back from Matthew. Someday I will, though. I'll find him and I'll ask him. It's gonna be awesome. I read Priest by Sierra Simone, and of course the only person I was thinking about was Andrew Scott as the hot priest. So legally that's the only way to read that book, so you can sue me. Priest is now what can I say so that the community guidelines do not flag this video? It's a spicy romance story about a priest who falls in love with one of the women in his church, and what ensues after that. I heard that the audiobook was great. Maybe I'll check it out as a second read. It's pretty spicy. It's pretty tantalizing. Once again, I'm not beating the Jack Edwards fan allegations. The book that I read next was Time Cut of a Face by Ruth Ozeki. This is the author staring at her face in the mirror for 3 hours and stream of consciousness writing her opinions, and I thought that was a fascinating premise for a book. And I listened to it on audiobook, and it's the author starting off by staring at one part of her face, and then she delves into these wonderful and fascinating tangents about her life and identity and her history, and she's just staring at her face, but then her mind, oh, it's so powerful. Next, I read This Is How You Lose the Time War by, let me make sure I get this right, Amal El, god damn it, Amal El Motar and Max Gladstone. This is a book that I think is better if you listen to it because reading it can be really confusing. It is a sapphic enemies to lovers love story. Not really spicy at all, just an interesting exploration of these two women who communicate to each other across space and time through all these different means that it's fantastical. It's very much surrealist, absurdist. So if you're into that sort of sci-fi, the magic system's not really explained, like the way that they send messages to each other is not explained. There's just, and the yearning. Oh, the yearning is absolutely fantastic. I have a series on my TikTok account where I ask myself, is the book better than the movie? And I answer the question as someone who has read the book and watched the movie. And a lot of people recommended other books that I should read and compare to the movie. And one of those is Coraline by Neil Gaiman. In terms of an adaptation, Coraline is pretty 1-1, with the exception that the movie has the character of Webe and the book does not. Otherwise, it's identical, which is really cool, but I prefer the movie because giving Coraline a friend in the form of Webe adds a layer of interest that I think the book didn't have. For anyone that has never seen Coraline, it's about a little girl who finds a door in one of the rooms in her house that she just moved into with her family that leads to her perfect life. And of course, if it's too good to be true, and it probably is. Probably most children's first horror novel, in a way. The next book I read is The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho. It was on Spotify as an audiobook and it's a quick listen. So I was like, yeah, let me read this very beloved classic. And all I gotta say is The Greatest Salesman in the World did it better and in 100 less pages. I read The Perks of Being a Wallflower by Stephen Chbosky. Also did an audiobook because I was in an audiobook mood and they count as reading. Argue with the Wall. This is about a high school boy named Charlie and it is written, I forgot the term for it, but it's written as diary entries. What I think is interesting about the movie adaptation is that it was done as a dramatization of the diary entries where you actually see what happens to him as opposed to him recalling what happened to him. He is a socially anxious boy. He goes to high school, he makes friends, the things that happen to teenagers happen to him, and he's just processing all of it. And I think the book is just a smidgen better because there are insights to Charlie's family that are not in the movie that provide a lot more context for why he is the way he is and why he interacts with the world the way that he does. Next, another classic that I feel like I had to read is The Stranger by Albert Camus. I think I missed something because I didn't particularly care about this book very much. This is a book about a man who commits a terrible act of violence and how he deals with it and processes it and justifies it in his head. The climax is this integral point of the book, and like I said, I think I may have missed something. I even listened to the introduction, which gives the historical context of it, but sometimes it's okay to read a book and not like them. You're not gonna like every single book, and even if you get it, you just not like them. It's okay. Next, we have a book that absolutely made my parasocial relationship with Julia Fox even worse, Down the Drain by Julia Fox. This is Julia Fox's memoir, and the amount of lifetimes this woman has lived before she was even 18, extraordinary. So many people all have the same opinion that her romantic relationship with Kanye West is the least interesting thing about her, and it's true. She writes about these things that have happened to her, very bad things, and she's not self-pitying, she's not ashamed, it's matter of fact, it is what it is. It's refreshing to see. I did listen to the audiobook as well, and like, I will accept no slander of Julia Fox ever. I will fight wars for that woman. I love her so much. Next is a book that so fundamentally changed me as a person and I love so much as now one of my favorite books of all time, that if I had unlimited creative liberty and money, I would adapt this book myself into a movie. Tender is the Flesh by Agustina Bazterrica. And I know people have opinions about this book. I will accept no criticism of this book. This is a book from Argentina that was translated to English by, who translated this? Hold on. Sarah Moses translated Tender is the Flesh. This is a book about a world where all the animals die because of a plague, and the government convinces everybody that veganism and vegetarianism is bad, so their only solution is they have to start farming humans for meat. And the story follows the protagonist who oh my god, I'm like describing this and you're probably looking at me like, what the hell is wrong with you? This book follows a protagonist who justifies existing in this world by telling himself that he's only doing it to be able to afford his very sick father's medical care. And the whole book is a satire about capitalism and how bad it is. The way that Agustina Basterica writes about how the world works and the states of the people, and it's just so, guys, it's so good. Oh my god. And a lot of people's criticism is like, why did they just turn to veganism? I'm like, well, because the government convinced them it was bad. It's like, that's unrealistic. Is it? Is it unrealistic? I love this book so much. Bury me with a copy, please. I love this book so much. Next, I read The Yellow Wallpaper by Charlotte Perkins Gilman, and it was originally published in 1892. It's one of the first ever pieces of literature about postpartum depression and how that could affect a woman. And it is a horror novel. Very short. Very, very short. You can get through it quite quickly. It's incredible that a book from that long ago exists and we have copies of it and we can read it. It's not even a book, really. It's a short story. How long is it? 62 pages. It's a little short story. It's one of those stories that you read because you want to be a well-read person, you want to understand history, and you want to just add wrinkles to your brain. We got Carmela by L. Sheridan Le Fanu, a book that precedes Dracula by over 20 years and is sapphic vampires from the 1800s. Obviously, it is a product of the time. You read it, it's not as salacious as something that you would read now, but the fact that that book existed in 1800s, pretty crazy. Another really quick one you can get through. I also recently read a retelling of Carmilla written by Kat Dunn called Hungerstone. So if you read Carmilla and you're like, oh, I wish they just cooked a little bit more with this, definitely read that one. It comes out in February. This next book I read was because one of my friends bought it for me as a joke and he didn't think that I would read it, but joke's on him, I absolutely did read every single page of this book. It's Get in My Swamp by G.M. Ferry. Now, if you are on the sides of TikTok or the internet that I'm on, you already know what this book is. But for anyone who doesn't know, this is Shrek smut. That's all it is. Someone took Shrek and made it smut. And it's not bad, just very rushed. If you had shockingly added like 50, 100 more pages to this, really developed it, really fleshed it out, it's not bad. This wasn't meant to be a Pulitzer Prize winner, but it was fun. I enjoyed it. There's other entries into this series which I haven't read yet, but yeah. You ready for this one? Buckle up. Crossing the Top Line by Thora Woods. Thora Woods is a wonderful author who so kindly sent me her entire bibliography when I was posting my silent book reviews. I'm just gonna give you the tags on this. This is Reverse Harem, Why Choose, Hockey, Enemies to Lovers, Omegaverse Romance. It's a lot. It's a lot. This is book 1. Book 2 just came out and I'm gonna read it soon. It's a lot, but it's a fun time! So, Crossing the Top Line, right? The protagonist is this woman that works at a hockey team as the social media manager, if I remember correctly. So everything's going great. She's living her best life. She realizes that her ex-situationship ends up getting drafted onto the team, and then that ex-situationship moves in with these 2 other guys, and they're all 3 of them roommates, and then those 2 dudes that originally lived there are together, kind of, sort of, and then all 3 of them fall in love with her. As you can see, I have a very wide variety of books that I read, okay? They don't all gotta be a Booker Prize shortlisted book. Sometimes I would like something like this, and I think that's okay. I think about the end of this book quite frequently. Thank you, Thora Woods, and Thora Woods' editor for making the end of this book a reality. Next, I read Lord of the Flies by William Golding. Clearly, we got a balance, right? You got the Omega verse hockey, spicy stuff. Now I gotta read one of the classics because that makes sense to me in my head. Lord of the Flies is about a group of boys who are stranded on an island after a plane crash, I believe, and it is a classic because it explores the relationships between these boys and what happens when you introduce an emergency. Gonna be honest with you, didn't care for it too much. Like, I feel like this is a common criticism from women who read Lord of the Flies, where it's like, why did they just go straight to violence so quickly? I'm like, guys, lock in, all right? And I know so many people have tried to make a girl version of Lord of the Flies, but I think it just won't work because I just don't think women are that immediately driven to violence. Next, we've got a beloved internet classic. We got The Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller. Clearly liked it very much, but everyone and their mother was like, you're gonna cry so much you're gonna cry so much. So mind you, I read this entire thing. I was close to the end and I'm like, I don't understand why am I gonna cry? Like, I mean, it's like beautiful or whatever, but like, then I get to like the last two chapters and then I think a bullet would have been less painful. The way this book culminates in that finale, oh, it's so good. For anyone that doesn't know what the Song of Achilles is about, please, excuse me, oh my god. This is the myth of Achilles and Patroclus retold. They're in love and it's beautiful and I highly recommend this book. Also highly recommend buying a lot of tissues when you buy it. Setting aside some time for self-soothing, for aftercare, because you will cry so hard you throw up. Thanks to this, I'll read anything Madeline Miller writes. We're going back to a classic, The Metamorphosis by Franz Kafka. I cried reading this. This was so sad. I felt so bad for him. This is the famous story of the man who one day wakes up to find that he's been turned into a bug. And the whole book is about his invisible labor for his family. His family just treated him like a workhorse. They only wanted him for his money, resources, his ability to care for them. And then when he wakes up as a bug and is no longer useful, it's so sad. Like, oh my god. And there's like this, I'll cry right now. I can't talk about it. I can't talk about it. Next, because I wanted to go from crying to just like raging, is Invisible Women by Caroline Criado Perez. It's a book about how women are just not counted in anything. It's about data. It's about how the world is built for men and how women are just not part of any studies, of any decisions being made, of just really hammering it in with science and research and data about how we are just left out. We're just left out of everything. And that's another book where it's a lot. It is infuriating, it is maddening, and I felt it was important to read. I think my blood pressure went up like 30 points reading. Next, I've got Baby's First Tolstoy, The Death of Ivan Ilich by Leo Tolstoy. It is a very, very short book. I really appreciate how Leo Tolstoy either writes these teeny tiny little books like this one or like 1,200 pages of War and Peace. There's no in between with this man. This is a dude who is in the active process of dying, coming to terms with that, processing it. Truly a masterclass in death and dying. And it's so short. You can read it really quickly. A sobering book to read. Next, we've got another banger by Mona Awad. This is Rouge. Now, what I love about Mona Awad so much, and I will read pretty much anything she puts out, is that her writing for me is the most vivid, where I can so clearly see it in my mind's eye, where I'm like, wow, this is a fully developed, described, painted world that she's made. Now, Rouge is absolutely no exception. This is, for some reason, billed as a Beauty and the Beast sort of retelling, but I don't listen to that. Also, something I tend to read a lot about is grief. Wonder why. This is a book about a protagonist who's always been obsessed with skincare, with taking care of herself, with her appearance, and her mom suddenly disappears and dies, really. She realizes her mother has this subscription to a very exclusive beauty club, so then she starts going to the beauty club and not everything is what it seems. Things are out of place, things are weird, she's losing time, she's like, she's going in there, waking up at her, like, it's a lie, it's crazy. It's crazy. Oh yeah, it's billed as Snow White meets Eyes Wide Shut. Oh my god. My arch nemesis. Quite possibly the most jarring bait and switch I've ever read, and that is Earthlings by Sayaka Murata. I picked this up because number one, huge fan of Convenience Store Woman by the same author. Number two, the cover is adorable. Look at that. It's so cute. I even wanted to buy the little plushie. You could buy this plushie. It's a whole thing. So I'm like, oh my god, this is gonna be great. So this is a story about a little girl who feels so different from her family that she's convinced that she's an alien. And I'm like, oh my god, how adorable. And then like halfway through, I'm like, oh no. Nothing could prepare you for this. This is I did not enjoy this book. I did not think it was good. I think the attempt at satire that was similar to Convenience Store Woman did not land here. I think Sayaka Murata swung for the fences. She gave it a shot, but I think it was a complete miss for me. I think the end was so shocking, so disgusting, so awful. We kind of lose the plot after a while, in my opinion, and I don't like this book. I don't like it. Next, we've got Galatea by Madeline Miller, one of Madeline Miller's short stories, and it was short, sweet, to the point. Don't remember much of it. Basically, after Earthlings by Sayaka Murata, I went to my local bookstore and I started asking around. I'm like, hey chat, I just read a book that quite possibly made me want to never read again. Does anyone have like a light, fun, easy read recommendation so that I can cleanse my palate so I have a will to live again after the ending of Earthlings by Sayaka Murata? And I got this one. It was Nothing to See Here by Kevin Wilson. This is a book about the protagonist who gets a call from her friend from college, and the friend from college is telling her, hey, do you think you can babysit my kids while my husband is running for office? I think her husband's trying to be senator or something. And then the protagonist is like, oh my god, yeah, that's no problem, Mom, on my way. And then the friend from college is like, oh, by the way, don't freak out. My kids burst into flames when they're agitated, but it doesn't hurt them. Don't even worry about it. And then the protagonist is like, what are you talking about? And she's like, yeah. So we think it's from their birth mom. They burst into flames when they're upset. So if you wanted a more fleshed out version of that scene in The Incredibles with the babysitter, Kari, this is the book for you. It's so funny. It's so silly. And it's got so much heart and it's so cute. Like, it's a fun time. This is definitely exactly what I needed at the time that I found it. And then because Viola Davis has never missed a day in her life and she got a Grammy for this, I was like, I'm gonna listen to her memoir, Finding Me. And this is the greatest audiobook narration of all time, and I don't think there will ever be a better one than this. It's Viola Davis. Do you think she knows anything other than absolutely nailing it every single time? It's fantastic. It chronicles her life from when she was a young girl all the way to the present day, and Viola Davis just puts her whole heart and soul into the narration. You can feel her, that she is performing this. Like, she is giving it all to, oh, next up, we got a controversial one. Okay, we got The Old Man and the Sea by Ernest Hemingway. So many people were telling me, oh my god, this book is so boring, like it put me to sleep, it's about nothing. This is a book about the end of life, about your body failing you, about getting older. This is such a good book. It's so sad. Like, I fully like shed a tear reading The Old Man and the Sea. It breaks my heart because it's about an old man and the sea. No, I'm just kidding. It's about an old man who is trying to capture this fish who has just kept evading him, and his young friend who keeps him company throughout the book. And like, it's sad. It makes me really sad, and I think it's a really well written book. Again, teeny tiny. I have a type of genre that I like, clearly. Next, I needed something that was a little giggle. I needed a little hee hee ha ha after The Old Man and the Sea. So I read The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy by Douglas Adams. Didn't know this was a trilogy. I will read the rest of it another time. This is so funny, like laugh out loud chuckle funny. There are so many zany characters. It's one of those books that you read for the culture where you're like, oh, now that I've read this, I understand everything else. It's about this guy, Arthur Dent, who's just plucked off of Earth by one of his friends right before Earth is meant to be destroyed, and they travel through space-time, and then there's like all these like run-ins with like people from Arthur's past, and like all these, it's just such a silly, fun time. I am a woman of my word. I read everything that Madeline Miller wrote. I did Song of Achilles, Galatea, and then this is Cersei. Now, Cersei is better written than the Song of Achilles, but I like Song of Achilles more just because it was more satisfying ending. This is a retelling of the myth of Cersei, who was banished to an island to live out her days in isolation after upsetting the gods. When you want to talk about female rage, we can talk about female rage. This is good at capturing the quiet undercurrent of rage that Cersei deals with throughout the entire book, and the way thousands of years pass in this book, like it really just spans, it's an odyssey. It's like, well, technically. Well, next we've got Butter by Asako Yuzuki. When I heard the premise of this, I was like, that sounds absolutely phenomenal. I need it right now. This is the true story of a lady serial killer who is also a professional chef. Now she ends up getting caught, she's in prison, and then she's not talking, right? And a journalist decides to cover the story, but she knows that the lady serial killer chef doesn't talk to anybody, so she starts writing letters to the chef, and through the letters, she starts figuring out all the murders, and I'm like, yo. It's a big boy. It is a complaint from a lot of people that read this book where it's like, it was just a smidgen too long. I would have to agree, it's just we could have shaved a little bit off of this book because it gets to a point. This is a great book exploring women's identities, the role of women in society, and just all of these like interesting topics. Like it clearly resonates because I annotated a bunch of them. This is a meal. Pun intended. I will be continuing this tomorrow because I've been yapping for like 2 hours and I am very hungry and I'm a little tired because I'm still recovering from the flu. Also, this is not the background I wanted for this. I wanted to do it from my desk, but it was too dark and I had to bring out the ring light and all. And then what? Doesn't this look a lot better now that I'm not filming from what looks like an underground bunker? Also, yes, I do have one of these scooter thingies and I rarely use it. That's a me problem. But anyway, moving on to the next book is Now Is Not the Time to Panic by Kevin Wilson. I decided to pick this up after enjoying Nothing to See Here very much. And this is about these two friends that when they're kids, they basically create an art piece and they put it all over town, and then it becomes mythological and crazy in the town because they can never figure out who actually put the signs everywhere, and it haunted the two protagonists ever since. And it was fine. It was all right. Nothing too crazy, nothing to write home about. Nothing to See Here is a lot better than this one, so. Next, we've got Pure Color by Sheila Heti. Now, this is a book that is, in fact, heady. It is abstract. It's not really a narrative structure. It's more like vibes. It's beautiful. I cried at the end of it, but it's very much like, what is this? Next is a book that kept me up at night because it was so bad and I could not understand how it was so popular. And that would be Remarkably Bright Creatures by Shelby Von Pelt. I don't understand how you have a premise that is so fascinating and then you focus the majority of the book on the most unlikable character I may have ever encountered in a piece of media, period, not just a book. Remarkably Bright Creatures is about this older woman that works as the custodian in an aquarium, and she has a friendship with this octopus, that knows what happens to her son who disappeared 20 years ago. Does that not sound phenomenal? And then for some reason, the majority of this book is from the POV of the most insufferable man baby ever put to page. And I don't understand. I don't understand. The best parts of this book are the POV of the octopus. And there's only like 6 chapters of that. And this is a big book. Well, big. I hesitate to say big when describing a book because there are fantasy readers who are probably looking at me like these are rookie numbers, but whatever. See, now that like we're here, I can roll around and get my other books. Ugh. Next, we have Loud, Accept Nothing Less Than the Life You Think You Deserve by the incomparable Drew Afualo. I think Drew is an absolute menace to society. Complimentary. This book was so wonderful and also made me really sad because I think to myself, wow, if I had a book like this when I was a teenage girl, I would not have made so many of the mistakes that I did when I was a teenage girl. But then again, I wouldn't be who I am today if it wasn't for this. So this is part memoir, part self-help, that if you are unfamiliar with Drew's content, she is very much about telling terrible men to shut up. It's basically teaching you how to stand up for yourself, find your voice, find your power, and decenter men. So if you're looking for something palatable, I believe is the word, to begin your decentering men journey, this is the one. I also got misty-eyed reading this because Drew talks about her life and her family, and it's very wholesome, it's very beautiful. So yes, this is Loud, Accept Nothing Less Than the Life You Think You Deserve, right? Accept nothing less than the life you deserve. Anyway, next we have So Late in the Day by Claire Keegan. Now, caveat here, this is the short story collection known as So Late in the Day, not the short story itself titled So Late in the Day. As usual, Claire Keegan knows how to get to the point in such a short amount of time. These are 3 short stories. I believe it's So Late in the Day, Antarctica, and I don't remember off the top of my head. It's open here in my computer. Hold on. Check out this keyboard ASMR. Hell yeah, brother. I don't understand. I can't find it. They're very dramatic. They're very deep. They are at sometimes scary, and highly recommended if you want even quicker and shorter Claire Keegan reads. Next up, we've got It Happened One Fight by Maureen Lee Lenker. This is my favorite romance novel of all time, and I'm not a romance reader because 9 out of 10 times they piss me off because of the manufactured conflict to keep the book going instead of 2 adults just talking to each other about their feelings. And I need to calm down. Everything's fine. I'm an adult. This is a 1930s old Hollywood inspired enemies to lovers story where these 2 actors who used to always be in movies together and almost fell in love due to a misunderstanding with the paparazzi ended up hating each other. And what's going on here is that the female main character here finally gets her own movie after being labeled box office poison, and then surprise, she's cast alongside the guy that she hates, and through another misunderstanding, they're actually legally married because the guy played a prank on her and the marriage document that she signed was real and not fake for the movie they were doing at the time. So now they have to do all this ridiculous stuff to get a divorce because she's marrying somebody else. It's a mess, and it is delightful. If you are a fan of old Hollywood, if you're a fan of movies, this is definitely the one for you. The author used to write for Turner Classic Movies, and now she has another novel that recently came out, His Girl Hollywood. This one, also old Hollywood inspired, and I can't wait to get into that eventually. Next, we've got The Hustler by Walter Tevis. I enjoyed this. This is the same author that wrote The Queen's Gambit, which got adapted into the Netflix show with Anya Taylor-Joy. And this is basically The Queen's Gambit, but with pool instead of chess. And I think it's phenomenal. It's this dude who is one of the best pool players ever, and then he starts getting way too carried away with gambling, and he wants to beat like all these other really great pool players, and like how the game and the gambling and the thrill consumes him. I loved it. I had a great time reading this. It's, you know, an easy, quick read. It's cool. I liked it a lot. Next, we have a book that became one of my favorites of all time ever. Bury me with a copy of this book. What was the one I said yesterday? Tender is the Flesh. But this one is I Who Have Never Known Men by Jacqueline Hartman, translated by Ron Schwartz. This book ripped my heart out of my chest, showed it to me, chucked it into Lake Okeechobee, and laughed at me while I cried. On the surface, this seems like such a standard issue sci-fi book where it's about these 40 women who live in an underground silo, have no memory of how they got there or who they were before they were in the silo. And then the youngest of them is the protagonist, who is a girl that only knows the silo. She was born and raised in the silo. She becomes the key to the change in these women and trying to leave the silo. And oh my God, it is so incredibly written. I cried so hard I almost threw up by the end of this book. I think it is extraordinary. I think it is an excellent exploration of women and female relationships and what it means to be a woman and what it means. Oh my God, it's just so Good. Next, to prepare for the new one coming out, I reread the entire Hunger Games franchise as well as The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. I was convinced that I have seen the Hunger Games movies, but it turns out I haven't. I was just on Tumblr during the height of their popularity, so I absorbed all the information by osmosis. So I was like, wait, I've actually never seen the movies or read the books. So I read all the books. Hunger Games, great. What is there to be said about the Hunger Games that hasn't already been said? Catching Fire is extraordinary. Like, I cannot get over how good Catching Fire is. And then Mockingjay was such a letdown. And I'm like, oh my God, it was such a bummer. So much of what made the first two so good falls flat in the third one. Because straight up, she just didn't write an ending for the third one. She rushed it and resolved so many things off camera, which works in the second Hunger Games book because that was a plot twist. But in Mockingjay, it's lazy writing, and I was so upset. And then major character deaths have no weight to them because they happen so quickly and so in succession, and some stuff that happens in Mockingjay makes no narrative. Anyway, then I read The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, and this was such a waste of time in my opinion, because I don't know the backstory or the lore. Apparently, Suzanne Collins was contractually obligated to do another book before doing Sunrise of the Reaping. And I can kind of tell because I don't really know what the point of ballads is if there's no emotional payoff, if we know that Coriolanus is the worst in the Hunger Games trilogy. Like, he was just evil the whole time. Chapter 1 of Ballads is literally him saying he hates poor people. Like, I don't know what to tell you. Also, The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes is marketed as the start of the Hunger Games, but no, they're on the 10th Hunger Games in Ballads, so it's already like 10 years into the... Alright, Suzanne, don't fail me now with Sunrise of the Reaping. That would be awful. Once again, in the category of I support women's rights and women's wrongs, we got All Fours by Miranda July, baby. Is this a signed copy? Oh my God, it's a signed copy. I didn't even notice. That's cool. This is a woman going through her midlife crisis where she decides to go on a cross-country road trip to New York, but she makes it 30 minutes out and ends up staying at a hotel that's that close to her house, and then she remodels it and starts having like a pseudo affair with a guy in her town. Mind you, her husband fully believes that she's in New York across the country, but she's just, you know, down the road, freaking the hell out, doing really interesting stuff. This is a great book. It's got a bunch of banger lines in it, and I think it's funny, I think it's heartfelt, I think it's interesting, and I think that the titular character is so relatable also. Like, there are not many books that are written about women in midlife, especially not one like this where it's a positive light. Like, you know what I mean? Next, we've got Men Have Called Her Crazy by Anna Marie Tendler. This is the much-awaited memoir of the artist Anna Marie Tendler. Most people would know her as John Mulaney's ex-wife, but she is so much more than that. This is a book, a memoir, chronicling her time at a mental health facility that she checked herself into when her mental health got to be its worst. And she talks about how men have treated her throughout her life and how it really contributed to, like, the way that she behaves throughout her life. And I think in terms of female rage, she nailed it. A lot of people have criticisms about this book, and I get it. I went into it knowing full well she was not going to talk about John Mulaney. I think that would have cheapened the book. I think it would have been boring if it was like all the scalding hot tea. No, I wanted to hear about her, the way she processes what happened to her. Also, this was during the height of the pandemic, so it's a lot. I think it's an interesting book. I enjoyed it. I recommend it. Next, we've got The Art Thief by Michael Finkel. This is the true story of the most successful art thief in history who amassed close to $2 billion in stolen art. And he was just some guy. Like, this guy did not have any special training. This guy did not have a team. He was just some guy. And then later on, some ladies helping him out. Like, it is incredible that this is a true story. The second you open this book, you're like, what the hell is going on? And what's fascinating about this book is that you're reading about this guy who's just straight up stealing from all these museums all over the world. And the way he talks about the art and the way that he feels about the art, you genuinely are low-key rooting for him at some point. Obviously, you should finish the book before you make your conclusions, but you're like, I kind of get where this guy is coming from. And you're like, no, I should not be rooting for this guy. He is literally stealing art. Next, I read this book called Pink Glass Houses by Asha Elias, and she is a local Miami author from what I've heard. And it's billed as a satire about the rich moms in Miami Beach. And I did not like this because I have such a problem with things being labeled a satire, but if things in the satire operate exactly as they do in real life, I don't think it's a satire. I think that's just a documentary. So I read this whole book and I'm like, no, there actually are rich moms in South Beach that act like this. And to me, the book didn't ping that she was a native from Miami Beach. Like, that's just me nitpicking. But overall, the book is whatever. If you're into just reality TV as a book, you probably would like Pink Glass Houses by Asha Elias. This is A Visit from the Goon Squad by Jennifer Egan. And the way that I sell this book to people is that this is the book that A Little Life by Hanya Yanagihara thinks it is. Because A Little Life is an awful book. It's trauma porn, it's gratuitous, shock value, it's awful, don't read it. This book tackles all the same subject matter but has something to say about it. It's not gratuitous. It actually gives every character agency. It actually has things to say about the traumas that they all go through. It has things to say about the mistakes that they make and the growth that they make. It's a good book. I think it won the Pulitzer. Yes! So Benny is an aging former punk rocker and record executive, and Sasha is the passionate, troubled young woman he employs. Here, Jennifer Egan brilliantly reveals their past along with the inner lives of a host of other characters whose paths intersect with theirs. This book is written in the form of 16 short stories that all interconnect throughout time. It's great. Please read A Visit from the Goon Squad by Jennifer Egan, and don't read A Little Life by Hanya Yanagihara. Next, I read Ace by Angela Chang on the recommendation of Sarah Schauer, who is in her scholar academic era, and I absolutely love it. So many of her book recs have completely changed my life, this one included. This is a book all about asexuality, written by an asexual author. It really cracked my brain open like a walnut with a lot of different topics where it's okay, so there's something called defamiliarization as an artistic technique where it basically presents something well known to you in a new way so you can look at it in a different way and then really think about what you think about it. So Angela Chen takes all of these societal prescriptions, like the obsession that culture has with sex and all these other things, and places it in the lens of being ace, where that's just not something that ace people tend to prioritize, and it's just a great time. Next is a book that sounded so silly. It's called The Second Smartest Dog That Ever Lived by Will Pass. Now, this is a real veterinarian that wrote this book, and it is about a dog who wakes up with the full intelligence of a human being, but has no idea how he got there, how he can even think that clearly and that intelligently. And the whole book is him trying to find out where he came from with the assistance of a pug described as with the intelligence of a pug. It's like a cerebral Homeward Bound situation, and it was a fun read. The author really painted this vivid world of animals operating within hours, and they all talk to each other, and they can, like, obviously the way it's written, they all speak English and we can understand what they're saying. Next, I read Schoolgirl by Osamu Dazai. This is my first ever Osamu Dazai. It takes place an entire day, if I remember correctly. It's the inner monologue of a schoolgirl and the stuff that schoolgirls deal with. And it makes me think of the line in Jennifer's Body where Needy Lesnicki says hell is a teenage girl, because being a teenage girl is literally awful. So this is a book that, despite being written by an adult Japanese man, perfectly captures being a teenage girl. Next, I read Margot's Got Money Troubles by Rufi Thorpe. This is a very interesting book about a young woman who becomes a mom and she doesn't know what she's gonna do for cash. So she taps into her dad's knowledge of creating a persona because her dad is a former professional wrestler. And then she opens up an OF, and it is fascinating that this plays with format, because the beginning of the book tells you, from the protagonist's perspective, When I'm speaking in first person, it's that I am okay with the decision I took at this time. But when I'm speaking in third person, I want to place distance between myself and this decision because I feel bad about it. And I'm like, what an interesting way to like foreshadow what's going to go on in a chapter. Because once you see that a chapter starts at third person, you're like, oh my God, what did she do? Next, we've got Woman Eating by Claire Coda. This is something I found just browsing the bookstore. And I can understand why this has a lot of negative reviews, because this is about a lady vampire, and that is traditionally associated with the horror genre. So a lot of people pick this up not knowing that it was an exploration of womanhood and she happens to be a vampire. Imagine dealing with being a woman and you're also a vampire. This is such an interesting piece of vampire literature that I highly recommend everybody read, because I've never really read anything like this that was about vampires. I don't even know how to explain Paradise Rot by Jenny Vol, so I'm just gonna read the blurb and then I'll try my best to elaborate. Jo is in a strange new country for university and having a more peculiar time than most. In a house with no walls, shared with a woman who has no boundaries, she finds her strange homecoming to life in unimaginable ways. Jo's sensitivity and all her senses become increasingly heightened and fraught as the lines between bodies and plants, dreaming and wakefulness, blur and mesh. This book is an absolute fever dream. It deals with codependency and identity, and it's very surrealist and it's very feverish and it's psychedelic and visually ambitious, and there's a lot going on here. I thought it was cool. Couldn't tell you what it's about though. Next, we've got The Nasty Bits by Anthony Bourdain, R.I.P. Love ya, Tony. This is all of the leftover pieces of writing over his career that never got published or put in any publications. What I like the most about this is that in the end, the present day Anthony Bourdain, or when it was written, he revisits a lot of the stuff that he wrote and he provides like additional context or his opinion, or if he changed his mind on certain things. I thought it was really interesting. This made me want to read his other books because this was very much like supplemental material. It was also a gift from one of my close friends, and he was right. I enjoyed it very much. Probably my favorite thriller to date. This is They Never Learn by Lane Fargo. This is about a female college professor who's also a serial killer, that she only kills terrible men on campus. And while that's happening, another girl is admitted to the same college. So the way their stories connect is crazy. If you're a fan of Good for Her books, this is the one for you. I didn't see the twist coming, but then again, I don't read a lot of thriller. And then I recommended it to a friend, and then she saw the twist coming, and I'm like, now I don't know what to believe anymore. Like, am I bad at being able to tell if a plot twist is coming? Next, I finally got around to reading Daisy Jones and the Six by Taylor Jenkins Reid. I did an audiobook of this while I went to Nashville, because in my mind, I'm like, well, this is about a band and Nashville is all about music, so legally I have to, I don't know. The vibes were right and I went for it. This is about the fictitious band Daisy Jones and the Six. It's written in the form of documentary interviews, which is why so many people said to do the audiobook, because there's a whole production and a full cast, and it was a bit slow in the beginning, I'm not gonna lie. I was at the point where I'm like, all right, where is this going? Why is this so popular? Then halfway through, I'm like, oh, okay, I see what's going on. And then by the end of it, I was very pleased. I thought it was very interesting. Next, we've got The Diary of a Void by Emi Yagi. I did not care for this book at all. It was marketed as a comedy, but it is very much not funny, or maybe the type of humor escaped me. I'm not sure. But regardless, the end left a lot to be desired for me because there was really no payoff. Nothing really happens at the end of this, and for anyone that doesn't know, this is a book about a woman who fakes being pregnant to get better treatment at work because she kept being treated terribly. So she's like, what if I just lied about being pregnant? And the premise sounds great. That sounds fun. But it was just boring for me. So it was a bummer. Next up, decided to cleanse the palate with a little classic. I read And Then There Were None by Agatha Christie, the queen of the murder mystery. This was awesome. I don't know what else to tell you. It's the story of all of these people being called to the same house on an island, and then all of a sudden a disembodied voice is like, hey, so all of you are here because of the sins of your past and it's time to pay. And you're like, what is going on? I remember watching a production of this in college from my school's theater program, and I was like, let me go to the source. Let me read the original. Now, one I didn't love as much is Hearts of Darkness by Jana Monroe. Jana Monroe is, at the time, the only woman at the FBI's behavioral science unit, the science unit that the show Mindhunter is based on. John Douglas was there. They dealt with all of the most prolific, most awful serial killers at the time. And this is her memoir. So I thought, oh my God, I would love to hear her story and what it was like for her as the only woman in this male-dominated space. Unfortunately, the book reads more like a very long Wikipedia article where the majority of it is facts about the cases that she worked on more than getting a sense of who she is as a person, which I was let down by. It's still an interesting read. It's just not what I was expecting, and I was bummed out. The thing I remember most about this is just facts about the cases that she worked on. Like, her husband was the dude at the Waco siege, and I'm like, whoa. The guy trying to stop it, not the guy doing, oh my God. Obviously, to counteract such heavy subject matter, because there are certain things in Hearts of Darkness that I can never unread. So I read Book Lovers by Emily Henry, and this book, quite frankly, changed my life. I thought to myself, screw it, I'm finally gonna read an Emily Henry book. Book Lovers sounds right up my alley. Enemies to lovers, real type A book agent, and the other guy, what was his job? He was an author, I think. I don't know. They can't stand each other, and then they're like in forced proximity, and like they find, oh my God, it's a fun time. It's a fun time. I cried for 20 straight minutes after I finished this, and I thought to myself, wow, if everything Emily Henry writes is like this, then I'm a fan for life. These are famous last words, by the way, but we'll get to that. Next, I read by Julia Shaw. Once again, a recommendation from Sarah Shower. This is a book all about bisexuality and the history of it and the culture, and it's just an all-encompassing book about bisexuality, and I absolutely loved it. I think it is so important to read this. It was so validating. It was so illuminating. Last year, I went to Smut Lovers, the convention, which is a convention all about education, about lots of different spicy stuff, right? And a fun thing that they do here is that they sell a lot of books. A lot of your favorite authors are there selling books, and they're so affordable. All that to say is that I bought a lot of them, but the next book I read is by the creator of the convention herself, Nikki Rome, and she wrote, hold on, and it's called Fierce Behavior. So what I gathered about most authors at this convention is that they have whole entire cinematic universes where it's series that all take place in the same universe, different characters and stuff, but like it is the multiverse of madness in terms of spicy content, right? So this is one of the ones for Nikki Rome. She has several series. This one is, I think, book 3 of this. I'm just gonna read the blurb. When Antonio Conti hit the floor in front of me, I thought it was the end of his life. I prayed the earth would open me up and take me with him, but instead I was thrust into a world of chaos, one that I would have never chosen for myself. Now I'm living a life far from normal, in love with a man who wanted nothing to do with me and facing the one thing every woman feared. I had countless reasons to turn and run from everything I knew, but my heart wouldn't let me, so I ran to the one person I needed closure from, hoping for a new beginning. This is very much a mafia romance. Oh, a cat. He's groveling. There's a lot of spicy stuff in here. It's a fun time. Next, I read World War Z by Max Brooks. I was also recommended this book by a friend, and she said to listen to the audiobook because, again, full cast, full production. It's really, really cool. It was also a recommendation for my Is the Book Better Than the Movie series, but I still haven't seen the movie. From what I've seen, the movie is absolutely nothing like this book. So this is a fictitious oral history of the aftermath of the zombie war. So it's the author, a fictitious version of the author, interviewing different people who survived the zombie war. And it's told in like a series of short stories, and it's absolutely fascinating, and I enjoyed every second of this. I thought it was really cool. And it's usually not a book that I would gravitate towards, but I think, as you can see by this absolutely ridiculously long book video, I read pretty much any category as long as it's interesting. Next, I read Night Bitch by Rachel Yoder. Me looking to the monitor as if I don't have the book in my... This is about a woman who is fully convinced that she's turning into a dog, and it's a commentary on postpartum depression and the role of motherhood and how barbaric it can be. I read this because the movie came out recently and I still haven't seen the movie, and again, want to do my opinion on is the book better than the movie. Apparently the end of this book was changed in the movie. Not sure how I feel about that because the end of the book is pretty interesting. Oh, ho, ho. Here we go, chat. Oh! Next! I finally read the Southern Reach trilogy, and I am very rarely a series girl, but the Annihilation trilogy by Jeff Vandermeer is extraordinary writing. I was recommended I read this because a lot of people know how much I love the Annihilation movie, and they were telling me the movie's a terrible adaptation. Notice I said adaptation. It's not a bad movie, it's just a bad adaptation of the book. And they're like, you have to read the book. And I'm like, okay. So I read Annihilation first. I read this in one sitting. It was so engaging. It stands alone if you wanted to stop here, but why would you after how good this is? For those of you that don't know, oh my God, please excuse me. So there is a strange ecological event that happens on the outskirts of this like beach town, and it's something that is a barrier that cuts off this part of the land from the rest of the town. So the mysterious Southern Reach organization keeps sending expeditions in there to see what's going on, and naturally things get weird. Some people go in and some people don't go out. It's changing the ecology of the land. It's a lot. So Annihilation is these 4 female scientists that go, 5 actually, 5 female, no, 4. 5 is the movie, 4 is the books that go in there, and they're trying to figure out what's going on, and then things get super weird. So Annihilation is written as the journal of one of the scientists that goes on the expedition. And then the second book, Authority, is fascinating. It's very much a slow burn in comparison to Annihilation. Authority is from the POV of somebody that works at the Southern Reach. And Jeff Vandermeer has an incredible gift at presenting little pieces of information that will come together in the end. There's so many things mentioned in the first book that are mentioned in the second book, but the protagonist of the second book has no idea what any of those things mean. But because we read it in the first book, we're like, yeah. Then you have Acceptance, which is the third book of the trilogy, and this has 3 or 4 different POVs, I don't remember, but it's all of it coming together. I don't want to say too much about it because then that would require spoilers for each book. You absolutely should read the Southern Reach trilogy, and I read this because not only was it recommended to me, but there was a surprise 4th novel announced, and I'm like, well, I gotta lock in, and I need all the lore before I go to book 4. Now, before I started reading Absolution, I read The Lady from the Black Lagoon by Mallory O'Meara. This is the nonfiction book about the true story of the woman who designed the creature from the Black Lagoon and never got credit for it. This book made me sob on a plane. On my way to New York, I finished this book, and by the end of it, I was flooding the plane in my tears. It is such a good book. I will say, however, the first 70 pages of this book drags like a motherfucker. You're expecting all this information from Millicent Patrick, the woman who designed the creature, and so much of it is like her dad first. And I'm like, I don't care about her dad. I want to read about her and how she got to where she got. It does get there eventually, absolutely. It is a magnificent piece of history, and I'm so glad that Mallory O'Meara decided to write this because she always was a fan of the creature from the Black Lagoon, and she would always tell people, Millicent Patrick is the one that made it. It wasn't one of the Westmore brothers, and someone should really write a book about that. And then one of her friends was like, maybe you should write it. And then she did. Okay. We are now at Absolution by Jeff Vandermeer, the surprise 4th novel in the Southern Reach series. Now, this is an ambitious one because it is a prequel and a sequel at the same time. What made the Southern Reach trilogy so fascinating and captured the imaginations of everybody for the last decade is that it answers as many questions as it leaves you with. So Jeff Vandermeer said that he came up with the whole story for Absolution quite quickly, and then he wrote it down, and it is definitely answering a lot of questions that were left unanswered in the original series, and whoa, It's a lot. This is a book where I have to read it again. Because this is a... the lore, this DLC for the original trilogy is crazy. So it's told in 3 parts. One is 20 years before the events of Annihilation. One is 2 years before, and then the other one is like a year after. So it jumps forward and backward in time a lot. I ended up doing the audiobook of this because I wanted to wait for the paperback to come out because I knew that I wanted it to be with the other 3 that are in paperback. But then I had the extraordinary pleasure of meeting Jeff Vandermeer at the Miami Book Fair last year, and I'm like, well, I need him to sign something, so I got Absolution. That's one right here. Next, we've got Hood Feminism by Mickey Kendall. Once again, a recommendation from Sarah Schauer. This book didn't tell me anything new. These are things that I was very familiar with and knew about already. However, if you are someone who is unfamiliar with intersectional feminism or topics like that, and you don't know where to start, and you want something that's a really good place to begin this journey for you, this is a great book to do it. Absolutely. Next, I got about halfway through rereading A Series of Unfortunate Events by Lemony Snicket, and I got to halfway into book 6 before I realized I don't like these books anymore. And that makes me so sad because they were my favorites growing up, and it was, you know, disheartening to read them 20 years later, and they didn't hit the same. They didn't hit the same. It was infuriating having to read these poor orphans being ignored by their guardians and bad things happening to them over and over and over again. Next, once again, I am not beating the Jack Edwards fan allegations. I read White Nights by Dostoevsky, and I finally found a copy of this while I was in New York. I went to McNally Jackson Books. Jesus! Jack Edwards talked a lot about how he thought he knew about love until he read White Nights, and this is a story about these 2 people that meet one night while the protagonist is walking home, and it is a conversation between these 2 characters about love. And you know, I got the suspension of disbelief you gotta have with this one, because like, if you took this at face value and you're like, this guy's a fucking weirdo. But no, you gotta remember this was written at a different time, and it's very much the Before Sunset movie, but even more extra. But it was nice, it was cute. I think for my first Dostoevsky, I'm down. Now this bad boy is not out yet, and I'm so sad because it's so good, and I'm literally counting down the days until it comes out. But I was offered an advanced copy of The Expert of Subtle Revisions by Kirsten Menger Anderson. This is about a woman who lives off grid, and she only talks to her dad, who's always sailing all the time. One day, her dad does not show up to their agreed upon meeting place. So the whole book is her both trying to find her dad and this historical thing that happens centuries before that connects in such an interesting way. Now, the reason the cover is a Wikipedia article is because the protagonist is a professional Wikipedia page editor, and that comes into play later because the way that she communicates with her dad is through the edits of Wikipedia articles. And it's so fascinating having a book that is historical fiction and sci-fi and about family. I've never read anything like this before, and I had the absolute delight of posting about this, and the author reached out to me like, hey, do you want to like jump on a Zoom call and like talk about it? And I'm like, yes, I have so many questions about this, and it was so fun. I cannot wait for this book to come out. I can't wait for everybody to read it. Also, there's a queer love story in it. Yup! All right, this one was a doozy. It's The Drama of the Gifted Child by Alice Miller. I listened to the audiobook of this because it was short, I needed something to get through, and I don't know why I picked The Final Boss of Therapy to do that. This book is about me. I was not emotionally prepared to read this when I did, because she would drop a truth bomb so violent that I had to like, oh my God, I had to bring it up in therapy. Like, How do I explain the drama of the gifted child? This is basically a book about people pleasing kids and the effect that it can have on you as an adult. It is about emotional neglect. It is about our family meaning well, but it just doesn't work. Very short book, but it was like a blowtorch to the face. It was brutal. Do I recommend it? Absolutely, but you gotta be in the right headspace for that. Next, we've got Open Throat by Henry Hoke. This is about a queer mountain lion going through an existential crisis all around Los Angeles. Oh my god, my battery's about to die. He gets lost from where he lives and ends up going on a lot of misadventures throughout Los Angeles, and it's honestly really sad. I was a little bummed out by the end of this. Like, it's a well-written book. I think it was interesting. I've never really read anything like this before, and it's such a quick read. It's so short. Next is what at the time was an advanced copy, but it's already out now, and I recommend everybody get it. It's The Mother Lode by Sarah Hoover, and clearly resonated. This is Sarah Hoover's memoir discussing her experience with postpartum depression after her first child, and it's absolutely brutal. And a big criticism with this book is people saying that because she's a rich woman, she shouldn't have written about this, but I think that's reductive. I think it's an excellent example of postpartum depression and other mental health conditions don't care about your financial status or social standing. It could affect anybody. And even Miss Hoover herself, she had all the resources in the world, and this still almost broke her to the point of no return. What she describes in the book, I think, is relatable to anyone who's experienced postpartum depression and other things post-baby or even while they were pregnant. So I think it's a really important book that really highlights the realities of pregnancy and motherhood that so often people don't talk about, and then it results in a lot of people making decisions that they end up regretting later on in life. In terms of access to information, I think this book is great. I think it's an interesting perspective, and I think you should read it. Next, a book so balls to the wall insane that I still, to this day, don't know how to rate it. It is Rejection by Tony Tulatimuti. Tony Tulatimuti. Tony Tulatimuti. A lot of people have been saying that this is millennial literature, and I don't know what that means. But this is a series of short stories that all deal with the topic of rejection, and it is so outlandish, so over the top. The formatting is so interesting in some of them. Like, this is such a unique book, and I've never read something like this. And it's hard to describe because everyone in this book sucks. Everyone is terrible. It's a well-written book, but everybody sucks. So it was unpleasant to read, but also it's good. So like I said, to this day, I don't know what to rate this book in terms of a star rating, because everyone sucks and I hated it, but also it was entertaining. It's so hard to explain. Anyone else that's read this, please let me know down below if you know what I'm talking about, because this is such a unique reading experience. I read The Housekeeper and the Professor by Yoko Ogawa, and I cried like an absolute blubbering idiot after this book, because this is about a woman who takes a job as a housemaid at this retired math professor's house. And the math professor was in an accident where his memory only lasts 80 minutes. So it's the relationship between them and the way that he uses math to navigate the world around him. And it is such a beautiful book about found family. It is such a beautiful book about the beauty of life and the beauty of friendships and just what it means to be a human being. I'll cry again thinking about it. Oh my god, I can't even talk about this. All the Beauty in the World by Patrick Bringley. This is the memoir of a man who was a security guard at the Met for over a decade, and he decided to take this job after his brother passed away because he needed a place or something to do where he could be still and he could just do what he needed to do. And it is extraordinarily well written. I'm shocked But then again, if this dude was observing all the most beautiful pieces of art in history for over a decade and reading plaques and just knowing about everything, I'm sure that's going to translate into him writing such gorgeous prose throughout this book. It is absolutely breathtaking the way that this man wrote about his experience at the Met. It is, oh my God, I want to meet him. What's he up to? Hit me up, platonically. For my 100th book, I was like, all right, I want to read something quick, but is culturally significant so that it's like PEMDAS, right? So I read Rip Van Winkle. This is the famous American short story. Is it American? No, this is just a famous short story of this dude who meets some people in the forest and he takes a drink with them and then he falls asleep for 20 years, goes back home, everything's different. This is a horrifying book. Like it was giving me anxiety reading this because I'm like, I can't even imagine what it's like that you took a little cat nap and then 20 years flew by. I don't even, oh my God. Next, because I'm such a huge fan of the movie The Substance, which came out in 2024, I'm like, I need more of this. So I read Natural Beauty by Ling Ling Wang. This is pretty much The Substance with more lore. This is about a woman who takes a job at a very mysterious beauty company. She starts taking these supplements and doing these procedures and things start getting weird and you learn a lot more about the company that's providing these services and these supplements. It is horrifying as well. I went from Rip Van Winkle to this. It's just back-to-back horror. Remember how I said if Emily Henry's books are all like book lovers, I'm a fan for life, and that was famous last words? So I read Funny Story, and it is bar for bar, beat for beat, a diluted rehash of book lovers. I don't know what's going on. Can we let Emily Henry take a break? Apparently she's been dropping a book every single year consistently for a few years. And I'm like, yo, we can tell, let her take a nap. Funny Story on the surface, it's everything that I love. Slightly taboo. Protagonist is dumped by her fiance, and that fiance dates this other woman. And that woman's ex-boyfriend becomes her boyfriend. So it's a fake dating scenario where the two scorned exes end up moving in together. And they're like, wouldn't it be hilarious if we pretended to date each other and obviously they're gonna end up together, whatever. But like I said, it's bar for bar, beat for beat, exactly like Book Lovers. Like, so I'm bummed out because I'm like, I don't understand how Book Lovers was such a great book and Funny Story was infuriating. And finally, the last book I read is The Thick and the Lean by Channa Porter. This is a very interesting premise in that the taboos surrounding sex is switched to food. So sex is completely fine. Sex between any consenting adults is fine. And the taboo is eating for pleasure. It's eating for enjoyment, and anything other than eating for sustenance is considered a sin. And this is about two women existing in that world where one of them was raised very devoutly and strictly in that church that believes that eating for flavor is a sin. And the other one is a woman who was not raised in that and then slowly sort of operates within the other fact. It was interesting. The problem with it is that halfway through we lose the metaphor, because it was a fascinating thought exercise of taking all the taboos that we have surrounding sex and switching them with food. It tracks very closely throughout the first half of the book, and then the second half of the book, like I said, we lose the plot. It becomes so different and less about the world building and the commentary and, I guess, mild spoilers, but the big payoff of these two characters meeting isn't worth it because it's such a brief scene in the book, and it's like, so I read this whole thing for what? Like, what was this for? If anyone is keeping track at home, I covered 102 books and not 104. Now, one was because I signed an NDA and I legally can't talk about it, and the other one I don't want to talk about because it's a book that the author took out of print because of bad things that were happening inspired by the book, and I don't really want to encourage anybody to read it because God forbid we have another copycat situation. But anyway, those are all 104 books that I read. Now let's talk about the very few DNFs that I have. This first DNF might get me in trouble, but I did not finish Anxious People by Frederick Bachman, and I could not tell you why. I got 30 pages in and it wasn't capturing me, and I couldn't get into it. I'm not opposed to returning to this someday. Of course, I would like to read some of his work because he's very beloved. Earlier in the video I mentioned reading Priest by Sierra Simone, and so many people were like, hey, so there's 2 more books after that. I'm like, oh my god, yeah, let's talk about it. And I DNF'd both of them because I'm not sure why Sierra Simone has such a fascination with creepy age gaps. The Priest series is 1 book for each of the 3 brothers in the family. The age gaps for the 2nd and 3rd book was very much the brothers being adult men meeting their love interests when the love interests were children, and it's super weird. There's even a scene in the 2nd one, can't remember the title, but he was like, oh my god, I can't believe that I held her as a baby and now I want to be with her. Ew! Another DNF that got me into hot water with the faux intellectuals on the internet is A Confederacy of Dunces. This is the winner of the Pulitzer Prize. It's a me thing. It's just that everyone in that book is so terrible that I'm not rooting for anybody, and I find it very difficult to stay with something, whether it be a movie or a book, when everybody sucks. And I know what you're thinking. You read Rejection by Tony Tulatamuti, but like, I can't even explain it. Rejection is just so different. But anyway, couldn't finish A Confederacy of Dunces. I got halfway through before I was at my wit's end and I was about to schedule a lobotomy. I could not do it. And finally, I did not finish Paradise by Fernanda Melchor. This was just trauma porn. This was a very weird book. This was about these 2 kids living in like a gated community. One of them had an obsession with one of the tenants, and they just decide, what if we break into her house and assault her? And I'm like, what the f are we doing here? No, thank you. Well, that's everything that I did and did not read in 2024. What were your favorites of the year? What were your most hated of the year? Thank you for sticking with me through this extraordinarily long book recap, and thank you for your patience while I filmed it, because New Year's Eve I got a cold, then I got the flu a week later, and now we're here. So anyway, thank you so much for watching. Have a great rest of your day. Love you, bye.